Welcome to the Lovable Losers Show Halloween special. I'm here with Ray, and we got a few good scary stories that were based out of Texas tonight. We got quite a few of them, don't we?
It's that time of year again. A chill gets in the air, starts getting dark a little bit earlier, and things, as we know, come out at night.
Yeah, to touch you.
Yeah.
Uncle Ray Ray's got a game, doesn't he?
Acquitted. I think you need to look that up. I'm not going to talk about that.
So we got a few stories for you tonight. We got what were the name of it? I know we're doing La Llorona and the different origins that came of it. We're doing
some waterfalls at some state parks in Texas, and then there's one about a local, well, I'd say a constable maybe telling the story of the strangest thing he's encountered while he was 30 plus years on the force.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty interesting show, and just hang in there because you're going to love this shit. Here we go! The Legend of La Llorona. The tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long, flowing black hair. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks wailing into the night and searching for children to drag, screaming to a watery grave. No one really knows when the legend began or from where it originated, though the tales vary from source to source. The one common thread is that she's the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in the rivers and lakes. La Llorona, christened Maria, was born to a peasant family in a humble village. Her startling beauty captured the attention of both the rich and the poor men of the area. She was said to have spent her days in her humble peasant surrounding. But in the evenings, she would don her best white gown and thrill the men who admired her in the local fandangos. The young men anxiously waited for her arrival, and she revealed an attention that she received. However, La Llorona had two small sons who made it difficult for her to spend her evenings out, and often she left them alone while she cavorted with the gentlemen during the evenings. One day the two small boys were found drowned in the river. Some say they drowned through her neglect, but others say that they may have died by her own hand. Another legend says that La Llorona was a caring woman, full of life and love, who married a wealthy man who lavished her with gifts and attention. However, after she bore him two sons, he began to change, returning to the life of womanizing and alcohol, often leaving her for months at a time. He seemingly no longer cared for the beautiful Maria, even talking about leaving her to marry a woman of his own wealthy class. When he did return home, it was only to visit his children, and the devastated Maria began to feel the resentment towards the boys. One evening, as Maria was strolling with her two children on a shady pathway near the river, her husband came by in a carriage with an elegant lady beside him. He stopped, spoke to his children, but ignored Maria, and then drove the carriage down the road without looking back. After seeing this, Maria went into a terrible rage. And turning against the children, she seized them and threw them into the river. As they disappeared downstream, she realized what she had done and ran down the bank to save them, but it was too late. There is yet another version of she is part of a pioneer family living near its banks. Is attacked by Indians, seeing her husband killed brutally. The mother drowns her children in the creek to save them from a still more painful death. When the attackers find the only surviving members of the family, she frightened them off with her maddening screaming. Each version concludes with her insufferable warning. During this time, she would not eat and walked along the river in her white gown searching for her boys, hoping they would come back to her. She cried endlessly as she roamed the riverbanks, and her gown became soiled and torn. When she continued to refuse to eat, she grew thinner and appeared taller until she looked like a walking skeleton. Still a young woman, she finally died on the banks of the river. as to whether she died of a broken heart, was thrown into the river by an angry mob of vengeful villagers, or if she jumped to the same fate which she inflicted on her children. Not long after her death, her restless spirits began to appear, walking the banks of the river. Her weeping and wailing became a curse of the night, and the people began to be afraid to go out after dark. She was said to have been seen drifting between the trees along the shoreline or floating on the current with her long white gown spread out upon the water. On many a dark night, people would see her walking along the riverbank and crying for her children, and so they no longer spoke of her as Maria, but rather La Llorona, the weeping woman. Children are warned not to go out after dark, for La Llorona might snatch them, throwing them into their deaths in the flowing waters. Though the legends vary, the apparition is said to act without hesitation or mercy. The tales of her cruelty depend on the version of the legend you hear. Some say that she kills indiscriminately, taking men, women, and children, whoever is foolish enough to get close enough to her. Others say that she is very barbaric and kills only children, dragging them, screaming, into their watery graves. Well, that was some good takes on La Llorona, man.
Yeah, I've only heard the one story of where she threw herself for children, then jumped in herself, and
yeah, see, that's the only one I heard.
Yeah,
I never heard the version where they're talking where she was neglecting her kids. I've never heard that one.
I haven't heard that one either, but I'm sure since it's a folktale, it expands and the story gets
that
better.
One sounds to me that sounds like the most realistic one.
Yeah, well, I mean that one where the lady drowned her own children, brother, and have them tortured to death. That's another.
Yeah, that's another one too. Like back in those days, those Indians and the American Indian War. What?
Nothing.
Native Americans? Are you gonna be PC on me? You getting PC on me?
The English actually have a version of that's called Jenny Greenteeth, except she'll attack small children and the elderly. But
really,
basis of the story is kids stay away from waterways. Your parents aren't around.
Yep. So let's go on to the next story. Since we're on the subject of waterways, we're gonna go on to the story that Ray calls what was it called, Ray? Waterfalls?
Something about waterfalls, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was called Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls.
That's in there. That's a good song. It's all right. I got it.
All right, guys, here we go.
Waterfall Kids. In 4, 3, 2, 1. Grieving ghosts of mothers are not the only thing that can be found hunting waterways. Sometimes the spirits come in the form of children. Here are 3 examples of places you can find in Texas. But be warned, not everyone who visits these comes back the same, and some don't come back at all. Our first story takes place in 2014. 2 hikers were making their way through Sculpture Falls in Austin, Texas, when the apparition of a teenage girl appeared before them. She was, they would say, translucent and floating just above the surface of the ground, with dark black eyes and an expression on her face that makes both anger and horror. Before either of them could react, she walked right through them and disappeared. A few hours later, on the other side of the park, someone discovered the body of a teenage girl, hanging from a low limb of a tree. A suicide note had been pinned to the label of her dress. When the 2 hikers were later shown the girl's face, one of them suffered a minor stroke. It was, he said later, the same girl they had seen earlier that day. The story gets even weirder. In the suicide note, it was mentioned that the girl wanted to feel the air rush through her hair as she dove off to the waterfall to the rocks below, so that in that moment she could feel more alive than she ever had. So it appears someone or something else got to her before she had the chance to take her own life. Story number 2. In 1985, 3 hikers were found dead near the waterfall located in McKinley Falls State Park. Examinations by a coroner concluded that all 3, 1 man, 1 woman, and 1 little girl had died of heart failures. They were all found floating near the waterfall. A 4th hiker from the group, a young woman, was found 3 days later, wandering through the woods in a panic fright. When authorities questioned her, most of what they got was gibberish, produced by an unhinged mind. all she repeated over and over throughout the interview. The vampire children, they keep grinning at us. Next story takes place in a location known as West Cave Outdoor Discovery Center, which by all accounts is a fun place to go, as long as you go during the day. According to a number of people who live in the area, going out there at night could get you killed. As of 2017, the latest count of people who have seen the floating apparition of a screaming 12-year-old girl with a knife was well over a dozen, in a time span of about 20 years. That doesn't seem like a lot until you realize the number of unsolved stabbings in the same time frame is 15. Some rumors state that the girl was playing with a knife she found near the falls and ended up hurting herself and losing consciousness, leading her to go over the falls. But only her spirit knows the truth of what happened. So next time you find yourself hiking outdoors, maybe you should heed the words of that old song, and don't go chasing waterfalls.
Well, that was dark.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's Halloween.
Yeah, no, I get it, but that was super dark, man. Those kids are just... That's some creepy shit, man.
That's what you get for being outside, being outdoors.
No
getting
shit.
Sunshine and healthy and
I
stuff.
guess there is some truth to, them telling you to stay the fuck out of the woods at night. Like, that's some creepy shit, man.
It is. And think they're like at parks where people go hiking. I'm like, man, just...
Yeah.
The stabbing one's the one that got me. Like, ow.
Yeah, that was like in the corner.
Yeah.
That's scary shit. There's some weird stuff going on out there too. I mean, obviously, you have a few stories of your own, so you know that some shit happens.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's reasonable, plausible explanations.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's some shit you just can't explain.
I mean, the woods is scary. If you ever heard a fox or anything scream you're not used to at night, it is.
Oh,
creepy.
the noises, right?
The noises at night, yeah. If you're not used to it, it's like
the creaks and moans and screams.
Especially if you're in a part of the woods you haven't been in, like, or another state. It's yeah. It does make you sit up like, what's that?
Yeah, something you're not familiar with.
Yeah. And is my gun big enough? I don't think it is.
Yeah. Sometimes it might not be. So we're gonna go on to the next story, guys, and stay tuned.
When people find out what I've done as a career, the same question always comes up. What is the craziest thing you've seen on the job? I was in law enforcement, and so far, up until now, I've always been able to sidestep that question. I started in the same small town I grew up in. Again, it was a small town, and the calls that we received were mainly traffic related, some occasional teenage mischief. I know a lot may describe this as boring. For me, it was just right. Now back to this biggest event I've ever encountered. It happened on a night shift. I was paired up with another fellow officer due to my patrol car breaking down earlier that evening. We were called out to a residence located on the outer skirts of our jurisdiction. It was around 11 p.m. The report was suspicious activity. When we arrived at the scene, we were told by the family living there that there were very strange screams coming from the creek area, about 1,000 feet out. And sure enough, waiting outside on the porch with them for about a minute, we hear it. It's hard to describe what it sounded like. It was like a woman in very severe distress, but higher pitched. And each scream lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds. It never sounded like it was saying anything, it just sounded like a cry of sheer terror, and it repeated again. We tell the family to wait outside, we're going to investigate. So we walk down to the creek. We hear about 2 more screams getting louder as we approach the creek. By now we're both a little freaked out, weapons drawn. At this point there's 2 possibilities running through our minds. Someone's getting murdered, maimed in the creek bed, or it's a wild animal. As we approach the creek bed, we hear no screams for about 5 minutes. We search around and find nothing. Yelling at the top of our lungs, identifying ourselves for somebody to come out towards, that we are armed, if they're there to come out. Then we hear the exact same scream behind us, exactly where we came from. We get about halfway back to the house, and the scream comes so loudly it seems to be right next to us. We frantically shine our flashlights everywhere and find nothing. No eye glints of animals, no rusting of brushes, just silence. We trace our steps back and the scream comes from around the creek again. This time it lasted about 30 seconds and was much louder than before. We retreat at a hastened pace back to the patrol car and wait for a few hours to observe or see if we hear anything else. It doesn't, and we speak with the family, telling them to call us again if they heard anything, and then we get out of there. Now, let me tell you a little bit about both of us growing up where we're at. This is a rural part. You could call it the country, I guess you would say. And both of us, me and my partner, were both avid outdoorsmen, so we hunt a lot, spent a lot of time in the woods, especially that part of the woods. We're familiar with it. And I know no animal makes them to cry like that, especially one that can move stealthily without being spotted by flashlights. Me and him talked about it one time, and we said hope this was just a one-time occurrence. And for a while, it seemed like it was. Now I'm going to fast forward to about a month later. The sun was setting when I arrived at the scene. Several other official vehicles were already there, and there were many more to come, as they would soon find out. Many coming from other counties. One coroner vehicle was already present, as well as an ambulance, which would prove useless, as there was no one to save. The victims were all dead. Quite dead. A relative stopped by for a visit and discovered the scene, and called it in to the police. With the sun going down, it got pretty dark, so there was a flurry of floodlights from the cruisers being pointed in all directions, along with the excited movements of flashlights being held by nervous, restless hands, searching the trees, the ground, everywhere. There stood the trailer home. The front and back doors to the home were open, one of the doors hanging by one hinge in a crooked slant. Through the windows, you could see zigzag movements of luminosity as the beams of the flashlight searched the interior. Bloody handprints slid down the thin metal walls close to the front door, and more bloody hand paintings could be seen along the length towards the back door, their images dancing eerily in the light, like some ancient symbols telling a tragic story. I did not even want to imagine what was inside the home, but then again I would soon find out that it wasn't what was inside, but what was outside that would change my life forever. There was already crime scene tape placed in numerous scattered parts of the area, with little white flags on metal stakes stuck to the ground marking evidence. Evidence of ripped clothing, bodies and body parts, separated limbs, a pile of bowels, a piece of loose flesh clinging to muscle tissue. What used to be bodies that just hours before had been a family. Destroyed by a psychotic madman, or was it men? A murderous rage had taken place, no doubt. One so appalling that there were few witnesses to the scene that had kept their composure or held their recently eaten dinners down. At first sight, the victims appeared to be butchered by some unnameable weapon, possibly an axe or a chainsaw. Upon further inspection by the first arriving coroner, the wounds on the bodies were determined not to have been caused by a sharp instrument, but rather by some piercing, well-defined claws, and other wounds by some keen, long incisors. Wildcat, bear, wolves, the coroner shook his head in a baffled disagreement with each guess from the officers. The claw marks, for instance, on the back of the father's corpse, were distinctly made by 4 long claws and a smaller digit, like a thumb on the side. Its span was wider than the man's print, wider and different than a bear's mark, with deep, deliberate gouges in the flesh, rake marks from an angry, unknown source trying to grab its prey that was no doubt trying to escape. The wildcat and wolves theory was dismissed as the open wound marks were apparently made by a more grandiose animal source. The bite marks were much larger than any mountain lion, wolf, or coyote. Whatever did it had a longer snout and more sizable teeth. There were also indications in the larger areas of the cadavers of bite marks where the flesh, meat, and bone had been yanked away from the body, like a human who bites into an apple and leaves the impression of his bite with teeth marks. So were the open wounds on these individuals. Bears? Well, they aren't native to the area, but who knows, maybe a grizzly did sneak in some way, but that was far-fetched. That grizzly would have to travel several states and cross several rivers to even get close to this part of the woods. Everyone present was betting on the bear hypothesis, anyway, and no one ever thought of anything else to be the cause of such a savage attack. A bear. It had to be a bear. From the door of the home, an officer stepped down slowly, holding in his hand some type of garment. A dress. A small dress that would fit a small girl around 5 years old. He informed the onlookers that there were more little girls' clothing inside. This meant that there was a missing person, or an absent body member of the family. How could we miss that? We all prayed she was still alive somehow, hiding somewhere. A new search began. As time went by, additional law enforcement employees arrived, as well as a few volunteer rescue squad members. Groups were spread out and assigned to areas to examine and explore. Another coroner arrived to assist in the identification and causes of death. All types of samples were placed in plastic bags, marked as evidence, and carefully stowed away. As they were packaging up what appeared to be one of the father's arm, one of the doctors noticed something wrapped between the dead fingers. Using some tweezers, he slowly untangled a clump of long gray and brown hairs. This too was placed in a bag, marked and put away to be analyzed at a lab later. From somewhere in the nearby woods, a scream was heard. It was a man's shriek that turned into a long wail and then to whimpering. As others arrived towards the screaming, they could see by the gleam of several flashlights that the cop was holding his hat in one hand and his light in the other. There was blood on his face, the front of his shirt, and on the brim of his hat. More blood could be seen dripping on him. It was coming from above. High in the trees, the flashlight swung, searching for the source of the mysterious bleeding. A very small hand could be seen dangling down from a tree, in a limb way up high, as well as slender, lifeless leg that still had a white sock on the foot. The missing child had been located. The blood had trickled down upon the state trooper hat first, making him look up, and then he had the feeling of the cold fluid sprinkling his face, then sliding down to his neatly buttoned shirt. That's what had made him scream. The little girl had apparently been carried up the tree and leisurely eaten upon while carefully laid across a large tree branch. More of the same long gray and brown hairs were found sticking in the bark of the tree near her body. It is at that point that about 10 unmarked SUVs pulled up. Out of each one came heavily armed men. Then one man and one individual, apparently the leader of the group, spoke to our highest ranking on the site. I didn't hear what was exactly said, but you could tell from the body language it was an argument ensuing. And then in turn our on-site commander told us, turn over all evidence and leave the scene quickly. Do not disclose anything, and we would receive further debriefing at each of our appropriate headquarters. Before any of us could protest our objection, even more SUVs approached, at least 7 more, and in the distance you could hear 2 helicopters approaching. Sure enough, we were blocked out of the crime scene and told the official story would be a bear attack. I don't know about other departments, but I know in my department we all signed non-disclosure agreements. And as far as what happened, all that is known as heavy gunfire could be heard back in town for the rest of the evening. The area was temporarily off limits for about a week. They fenced it up, had guards on it. Then after that week, after the fence came down, the area was clean. There was nothing left, no trace of a home or the gore that occurred. Time passed. I eventually married a local from another a girl from another. Cut. 4, 3, 2, 1. Time passed. I eventually married a local girl from another small town and relocated there. Just recently I was back there with the same patrolman to celebrate his retirement. Same patrolman that I rode with on the first night when we were called to the scene. Finally, after all these years, we talked about it. We just figured not revealing a secret when you were there for both the events, not breaking any type of non-disclosure. Still, after all this time, there are so many questions left unanswered. Falling back to the night of the initial call, I could tell this was something that had hung over my colleague's head for years. So I shared my thoughts. Maybe I said not so much just to comfort him, but to try to make peace within myself. I told him maybe, just maybe, we could have been more aggressive in our search. We could have done more patrols to show more of our presence. But deep down inside, you know we would not have been able to stop that thing. We had nowhere near the firepower for let alone one of those things, whatever it was. My colleague gave me this look, disbelief on his face. He stumbled for the words, but then he asked, "How do I sleep at night?" I replied, "Not well most nights. Considering what the alternative could have been, had we been there, we would not be here now. Call it cowardly, call it selfish, call it what you want. As for me, I can live with it."
Yeah, that was one of those. That was one crazy story, man. And that's coming from an actual. What was it? A constable?
I think so. I mean, he didn't get into too much details, but also, I mean, a lot of people don't like, I guess, how it ended, but in reality,
I mean, what else could he? What else could you say?
I kind of agree with what he was saying. What could you have done?
What could you have done? Like nothing. And they were armed, but that wasn't going to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it was, I mean, you had to hear a lot of that shooting.
Whatever it was,
a lot of people, and
whatever it was,
if there was just one,
it was something that is known. Because those black SUVs don't show up for nothing.
I mean, what? Maybe there's a vigilante group or a militia, or are you
doubt
trying to say Big Brother? Are you trying to say government? Or
yeah, I'm trying to lean towards more
conspiracy
government.
there, buddy.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a conspiracy, man. I mean, Jesus Christ, what do you think? It sounded sincere, man. It sounded believable.
I don't live out in the boonies, so I'm all right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things. Like, yeah, let's not go camping.
Just gotta avoid waterfalls, waterways, outdoors, roads,
and women
driving,
walking. You know,
walking.
Don't pick up hitchhikers.
Yeah, just pretty much. Yeah, so it's,
just
I already know what I'm doing for my
Don't
Halloween.
get slaughtered.
Yeah, just so I'll be.
You know, beat the shit out of kids with black eyes. We got it.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. You better hope they're not wearing contacts, guys. Well, everybody stay safe out there for Halloween.
I hope you enjoyed, and see you next year.
We'll see you next year. Good night, guys. Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween.